Yep.
I wouldn't probably want to retire in Singapore or US. So that puts me at a significant advantage compared to people who would want to retire in these countries, because I'm converting my dollar earnings to rupees, which gives me a significant leverage.
Cool. Thanks a lot for taking all these questions, Pawan. I'm sure like there were a lot of ebbs and flows in your journey. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting for our listeners to listen as well as learn from them. Now
Yeah.
let's move a bit and focus on what do you, since you have the perspective of living in the US as well as in Singapore, of course in India, how do you differentiate between these three living spaces? What are their advantages and disadvantages? And what do you think someone who is in India who is currently thinking to move to Singapore or the US should keep in their mind?
Okay, let me divide this answer into economic, career, and social perspectives. Starting from economic perspective, uh, US is probably, I would say both US and Singapore are on equal footing. You will make almost equal amounts of money either in US or Singapore, again, depending heavily on your industry. If you're in tech, especially big tech, then probably Singapore is going to be a good short-term bet, but it comes at the cost of your career. You'll probably make as much money, or if not slightly more, than what you would make in the US post-tax. But it comes at the cost of your career. There's only so much that you can grow in Singapore, but in US, the chances for growth or the avenues or pathways for growth are significantly higher. Um, so economically, especially big tech, again, I'm not very sure of other industries, so I'm limiting my scope to big tech. Big tech economically, I would say US and Singapore are probably the same. India, yeah, India is way, 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 way back, both in terms of your earning potential and saving potential. You can probably save if you are really serious about an investment journey, and if you have had a good average career growth path in one of these big tech firms in either Singapore or India, 10 years or probably slightly more than 10 years of your career, working career, you can probably save up enough to lead a good, comfortable life in India for the rest of your life. Uh, you'll save up about good amount of like 5 to 6 crores, even with a good happy spending lifestyle. Just with a little bit of discipline, you'll save up easily about 5 to 6 crores, and you take that to India, put it in fixed deposit, and you still get about 35 lakhs per annum as just interest. So that's more than enough for you to lead a good, comfortable, happy life in India. But it might not be luxurious, but nevertheless, there's no problem to your roti kapda makan. That's taken care of. Uh, so yeah, economically, any given day, US or Singapore, the drawbacks of US is the only fact that taxes are super high, and there's no certainty in US. One of the reasons why I had to move from US to Singapore is about the visa uncertainty as well. So although the pay is higher in absolute dollar terms compared to Singapore, your taxes are also significantly higher. And even if you are serious about investing, and if any day if you want to withdraw your money from those investments, you'll end up paying a lot of tax even on those capital gains. In Singapore, the taxes are low and you have no taxes on capital gains. So if you're good and serious with your investing, then you can literally mint money in a country like Singapore. So depends on your pros and cons. But again, on the social life, there are a lot of cons in Singapore compared to US, depending on how you look at it. So economically, I would say short term, Singapore for sure. If you're aiming to settle down abroad in some country, then US for sure. If you want to make quick bucks, be there, slog your backside for about 10, 15 years. Singapore, nothing beats it. You make your money on as much as you can, go back to India and lead a comfortable life. But if you want to settle, retire, lead a life, or lead your life, rest of your life outside of US, outside of India, then probably US is a better chance. But again, US comes with its own immigration uncertainties, its own set of unfriendly visa policies. I don't see that changing anytime. It's not a political brownie point for anybody in US. So I don't think it's going to change anytime. So if you're okay living with that uncertainty for a few years or a couple of decades at least, then US is a good chance for you. US is a good place. Coming to Career-wise, I think I covered a little bit of it in the earlier economic section as well. Singapore is very limited in its career options. There are very few firms in big tech space that you can move out to. And even if you don't move out, if you want to grow within the same firm, there's only so much that you can grow up to. Just as a very crude statistic, Singapore will probably have a fraction of directors and vice presidents that you would find in an office in US. So there are only so many positions that you can grow up to. Beyond that, it's not possible. And even if you want to move out of a firm into some other firm, your choices are pretty limited. The firms that pay as much as big tech firms are very limited in Singapore. And even their hiring is now, especially considering the environment, they hire barely anybody here. At least 2020, 21, 22, it was pretty good. From 2023 onwards, it's become really, really, really bad in Singapore. So choices are very limited in Singapore, career-wise. And even that is, if you look at it laterally, even if you want to move to other career lines, like for example, I started my career in operations, core operations, and now I'm in technical field. That transition could happen only because I moved to US. That transition couldn't have happened in Singapore. Uh, Only for the fact that they're just limited roles and they would rather prefer hiring someone who already has a significant amount of technical experience coming to that role rather than giving a chance to someone and let them grow in that role. But US gave me that opportunity. I found the right team. They took a bet on me and they let me grow in that role. So that way, US, even if you want to move laterally to a different line of career, US has good amount of options. And even for upskilling yourself, in Singapore, the options are very limited. Like, for example, if you want to pursue any executive kind of a course, in Singapore, it's very limited. And two, even the options that you have would be generally either in Europe or US time zones. So you'll miss out on quite a bit. You will not, like, for example, for your listeners, before I moved to Singapore sometime last year around August, I wanted to get a good product management education, and I got myself enrolled in a Kellogg University product management course. The course had some live modules as well, where I would have to physically go to Kellogg University, spend some time there, network with peers, and pick up product management skills. And because I moved to Singapore, I'm missing out on all those in-person sessions. I'll have to take them virtually, which is a huge letdown. It's still worth it, but compared to the money that I'm paying them, there's no value that I see attending it virtually. I might as well take a I might as well watch some YouTube videos and gain same skills. So that's another, like, even upskilling yourself. US has generally way more opportunities to do that in a really credible way. Like you get good Ivy League university kind of a certification for if you're running well in the US, then it's not even going to dent a hole on your pocket. It's going to be pretty affordable. So those are from your career perspective. And social, US, you will have good network of friends, but the probability of you having family is very low. Majority of us who come as immigrants, our parents are generally aged and they might not want to move out of India. So that's always the back of your mind. Like, what if something happens to my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother? Then I am at least about 24 hours away from them. At least. In worst cases, probably a couple of days, or in like really unlucky cases, probably a week or a month. Because storms and hurricanes are very common, and when those happen, airports shut in US. So you can't do anything. That same thing happened to me when we moved to US. My wife was pregnant, and our hope was that once we move to the US, we'll get a visa for our in-laws and my parents, and one of them will come and help us out. But as fate would have it, COVID struck and embassies got shut probably about 3 or 4 days before their visa appointment was scheduled, and embassies did not open up at all. We were hoping that they would open at some time, but they did not open. So we were left. We were in a foreign country dealing with pregnancy for the first time. Both of us had absolutely no experience. And we had to pick up things from scratch. We had no friends, and we also very few friends, and even those friends were very afraid to step out because the times were such. And we did not even know the healthcare system there. So we had to pick up everything, learn from scratch. That took a huge emotional toll on us. And even when the flights opened up, it was a huge task to get a flight ticket, fly down to India. And even when you fly down to India, again, you had to go from one city to the other city. So it was a huge mess. But Singapore, luckily, you will not have such problems. You don't have any natural disasters happening in Singapore. You have at least like 10, 20 flights every single day to some major city in India. So you probably, if you think of going to India morning while having breakfast, there's a very high chance that you'll be having your evening tea in India, in your home, probably sitting in your home. So that's the advantage. And also, Singapore, if you earn beyond a certain amount of money, you can bring your parents here. They can live with you. So that's a significant respite as well. Of course, it comes with its own cost with medical insurance, medical costs, and everything. But if you're okay with those costs, then you have that option at least. In US, you don't have that option unless you get your green card and your citizenship, which for Indians is probably not going to happen in this lifetime. So socially, Singapore has a few more brownie points than US. But again, US too has its advantages. The Indian community in US is very closely knit. You develop really good friendship bonds with people in the US, which I don't see as much happening in Singapore. The Indian community here is not that closely knit as it is in US, probably because of the numbers. In US, it's rarer to find. There are like tons of Indians there, but still, it's not as easy to run into an Indian than as compared to Singapore. So probably that's one of the reasons why the community is very closely knit there. People are more than willing to help you out. So from that perspective, and one more thing that I missed out, an economic thing. In Singapore, you probably can never afford a car or a house. Let me say, it's not never, at least it's a significant amount of investment to own a car or a house here. That's not the case in US. You can easily buy a house. You can very easily buy a car. Buying car is as simple as going and buying a candy from a store. You walk into the store, you walk into the car dealership, and you walk out with a car in like an hour or so. So it's that easy. So those things are good with the US. But then overall, I think you have to evaluate your own family situation. How deep is the need for you to be close to your parents? How much are you bothered about your career, your growth prospects? And then you have to take a sort of a balanced call on it. But yeah, for me, being in US was good. It gave me a lot of experiences. It put me in a career path that I always wanted to be in, gave me the right kind of experiences, helped me build up some amount of wealth. And then I felt it's probably time for me to be closer to parents. And also the visa uncertainty there in US was a huge trouble at the back of my mind every single time I entered US. There's always that risk of them turning you back. So I thought it's probably time for me to be closer home and be in Singapore.
That's actually a great breakdown of the question itself. And I'm sure like the listeners would be like easy to evaluate if they are thinking about a move. You also touched a bit upon cost of living in terms of car and home, but shall we delve deeper into that? Like, what kind of percentage of your income do you expect to spend in Singapore versus the US? And also about the quality of life. We hear a lot about the incidents recently in the US in terms of shootings, etc. But in Singapore, like you don't find such incidents. So in terms of quality of life as well, like what is your perspective?
In terms of expenses, Singapore is sort of restrictive that way. Like even if you want to spend on something, there are not many avenues for you to spend on it. So you naturally end up saving more here because owning car is so prohibitively expensive. You probably don't end up a car. You take public transportation and you save up a ton of money on it. And whereas in US, typically like people who are born and brought up in India in an average middle class family, we would have not even dreamt of owning a car like an Audi or a BMW or Merc, but those are very common in US and very affordable as well. So you end up buying those cars. How much ever hard you may try to resist, you will end up buying one of those fancy luxury cars, and they only after buying you realize that they're white elephants. They cost more to maintain. They cost more to buy or lease. They drink fuel, a lot of fuel. So that expense adds up as well. So US, there's a lot of temptation for you to go spend. You actually need a car in US. Without car, it's very difficult for you to survive. But any basic car would do as well, which is probably going to cost you about $150, $200 a month. But you won't stop with that. Your tendency will move towards buying one of these fancy luxury cars, which will cost you anywhere between $800 to $1,000 or more, depending on the model, the variant that you take into account. So that's one thing. Singapore naturally forces you to control your expenses and save a little bit more. And on the housing, yeah, you can buy a house in US, but again, if you are working in one of these big tech companies, there's very high chance that you'll be living either in Bay Area, Seattle, or New York. All these three locations are super duper expensive, very expensive. But the only positive thing is that for the same price that you pay in US versus Singapore, you'll get a much, much, much larger house in US. That's the only advantage, and also you'll get much preferential interest rates, and it's much easier to get a loan in US compared to Singapore. So you'll I've often seen that people who spend about 4 to 5 years in US, they naturally end up buying a house or maybe a couple of houses and start living in their own house. So that does increase your expenses compared to renting. If you're renting in an area like Bay Area or Seattle, for about 3,000 US dollars, you get a good sized home. But if you want to buy that same house, then you're probably going to pay almost about $6,000 to $7,000 just as EMI. So almost double the cost. And that's especially gone worse after COVID because there's a lot of housing shortage. Interest rate was super low. People started buying multiple houses. So prices shot up. Economically, Singapore naturally forces you to compromise on a certain aspects of your lifestyle and lead a more frugal one. US incentivizes to lead a luxurious lifestyle. You have all those incentives everywhere. You step into a store, there'll be some offer on something, and that'll naturally tempt you to go buy that thing and lead a pretty luxury lifestyle. In fact, the house size that we're living now here in Singapore is slightly smaller than what we were living in US, and yet we had so much stuff, almost one stuff that would fill up one other room that we had with us. We had that which we had absolutely no idea of what to do. So US does that to you. It forces you to get into that consumerist mentality. So your quality of life is going to be better, but it comes at a cost. Safety wise, again, if you're living in one of these major cities like Bay Area, Seattle, New York, and if you're living in the suburbs of these cities, it's pretty safe. It's as safe as any major city in the world. I wouldn't say it is as safe as Singapore or Dubai, but it's as safe as any major developed city in the world. There's very low probability of crime or anything, but it's still there. Like if you're used to living in Singapore, then you'll find it a little bit strange moving to US because one, they don't have street lighting concept. You will not find street lights in US. Very rarely you will find street lights, especially in housing localities. So it's going to be dark, and that naturally induces a kind of phobia in you if you're used to living in a city like Singapore, which is brightly lit any time of the day. So that's going to be there and on the back of your mind. But again, even if you venture into the proper downtown of cities, those areas are pretty sketchy. They're actually pretty sketchy. You locally see people consuming drugs, smoking and all. So that could be scary, but yeah, it's as long as you use your common sense, as long as you stick to areas which don't have such open criminal things happening, the probability of something bad happening with you is as low as it is with any major city across the globe.
Interesting. Cool. I think we have covered a good aspect in terms of comparison between the cities. Rohit, do you have anything to add here?
No, I think that's actually a very well-rounded concept. And I think, as you said, there's always going to be a trade-off between, like, if you're an Indian who's choosing between your life in one city versus other, and you have opportunities and options to choose, there are going to be certain trade-offs that you laid out so well, right? I think the next piece that is like building up on this is having lived in Singapore and in the US and in India. How do you see your long-term sort of a financially independent, possibly early retirement life panning out? How do you think about it? How do you plan about it? Have you, for example, calculated a FIRE number? Tell us about that.
I haven't calculated per se, but recently I was watching some video on YouTube and some articles. And there, one thing struck to me. Basically, the formula somebody told me was your anticipated monthly expenses multiplied by 400. If you achieve that number, you should be good to retire. And that sort of added up mathematically as well with me. That is again for lifestyle in India. My long-term goal is probably to retire in India.
Yep.
I wouldn't probably want to retire in Singapore or US. So that puts me at a significant advantage compared to people who would want to retire in these countries because I'm converting my dollar earnings to rupees, which gives me a significant leverage. So considering that, I think the rule of multiplying your anticipated monthly expenses by 400 gives you a reasonably good figure to aim for. Where am I? I think I'm at about 60% of that amount at this moment. So another probably 4 to 5 years ish, and I should hit that hopefully. And then I should be good to retire. Although I don't plan on retiring, the way I plan is, what if something were to happen to my job? What if something were to happen to my career tomorrow? Like especially in this uncertain economic situation, that's how I think. I would definitely want to work till the time I'm happy working, till the time I'm learning something new. But retiring at a certain age or certain timeline is not on my plate at this moment.
Got it. I think that's a very interesting take, and coincidentally enough, like all of our like partners in the podcast, most of us have that long-term view of probably going back to India for the official retirement. I think very similar reasons to yours. The amount of money that will take to retire comfortably in a place like Singapore or in the US is prohibitively high. Like that will need you to work till you are probably 60 or versus being able to convert your dollars into rupees and then just having a, I would say, very upper middle class sort of a lifestyle in India, which can be close to luxury for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So let me then switch gears a little bit, right? Like I want to understand things around how do you, as you mentioned that earlier, you moved back to Singapore to be a little bit closer to your parents, right? And I know that you have a 4-year-old kid. How do you think about raising a kid in a foreign country and then still maintaining roots in your own culture, in your own country, having that relationship with your parents and your in-laws, and then making sure that your child is well integrated on like a more comprehensive way rather than just growing up as an NRI kid in a foreign land?
It's interesting there again. I am somebody who doesn't care much about those things. I believe that the kid needs to explore everything and then take a call whenever they are mature enough to take a call on what's right, what cultural aspect is right for them. But my wife is completely opposite. She really wants my kid to learn her native tongue. Both, in fact, I'm so bad. I cannot even read or write my native tongue. I can only speak the for a variety of reasons. I was not brought up in Kannada. My mother tongue is Kannada, but I was never brought up in Karnataka. I was brought up in Andhra Pradesh. But my wife is on the other hand, she really wants my kid to learn Kannada, to speak, to write, to read, and everything. So that's one thing that she has done from early childhood. The first language we taught him was Kannada. So I think based on the conversations that he has with me and with my wife, I very strongly suspect that he thinks in Kannada and then translates it into English. He can converse in English, like basic conversations and all. Like for a 4-year-old, he can talk in English, but I think studying his pattern of communication, I have an intuition that he probably thinks in Kannada and then translates it into English, which is a good way for me. Like if anybody is really particular about ensuring the kid having the right cultural upbringing, then making sure they learn your language is probably the first step. That's probably going to keep them grounded to the culture more than anything else. That's the language they're going to be conversing with their grandparents. That's the language they're going to be conversing with their cousins when they go to India. And if they talk in English, there's a natural barrier that gets built. Especially like my dad is very fluent with English, she can converse, but my mom is not so much. She can understand probably everything, but it's difficult for her to reply back in English. So if my son were not to know our local language, Kannada, then probably his conversations with my mom would be extremely limited. And I see that happening with my cousins. My cousins' kids, they can barely talk in Kannada, and they have very, very, very limited conversations with their grandparents. And every time they go to India, they keep complaining of how boring it is and how desperately they want to go back to their country, whatever country they're from. But luckily, my kid can converse fluently in Kannada, and that's not at all a barrier for him to converse with our neighbors in India or parents, cousins, and all. So that's one thing that I think we have done right. The other thing that I do is, although I'm not very particular about language, I do believe that the Indian culture, or the Hindu culture more specifically, has some very valuable mythological stories. More than anything else, they're not about religion or God or anything. They're just about leading a good lifestyle, good citizenship values, especially stories from Amar Chitra Katha, stories from Krishna's life. So those are the things that I tend to read out to him. I took a lifetime subscription of Amar Chitra Katha, and I download their comics on my phone or on iPad, and I read them out to him every night. Some random story. I don't have like a fixed story. Whatever I like, whatever he likes visually, we just pick that up and then I read it out to him. So that way, I believe more than anything, more than teaching him religion or anything, it teaches him at least what, to my belief, is a good being how to be a good responsible citizen more than anything else. So these are the two things that we do. My wife is very focused on language and teaching him Sanskrit shlokas and all. I don't
Oh,
teach
wow.
him shlokas and everything, but I focus more on like storytelling. I like telling him stories from these mythological books and everything, so that he picks up them and subconsciously tries to imbibe those lessons.
That is extremely insightful. And honestly, this is the first time I have, and I know you mentioned that you don't do it very intentionally, but this is a very concrete set of things that you are doing, which I haven't heard from anyone else on this podcast before. And we've had people who have kids, and we've asked these questions to them as well. So thank you for sharing that. All right. Cool. So thank you so much, Pawan. I think that brings us to the end of our conversation today. We really appreciate all the insights. Uh, any final tips or advice for people who are either NRIs or aiming to become NRIs in the near future, in terms of managing money, or just how to decide, or like what framework to use for their decisions?
I'd say a couple of things. One, I think it's high time that we let go of that mad passion to be an NRI at any cost. That's not true anymore. India is the place where all the growth is going to happen. These worlds have saturated. It's good if you want to lead a good, comfortable lifestyle, but it's not good if you want to lead a challenging life. Challenging life is in India. So again, there's no harm in aiming for it, but don't be obsessive about going to abroad or nothing about it, or nothing at all, nothing second at all. And second thing I've seen is people have this mad passion again to go study in US, Canada, without thinking about the financial and the visa impact of it. A lot of these education courses outside cost a fortune. You by insisting on pursuing those courses, you're essentially doing a few things. One, you're putting your parents in huge debt. You're putting yourself in huge debt. And three, you don't have a very clear pathway to pay up that debt. Because you're going on a student visa, there's no guarantee of employment after student visa. There's always that uncertainty. And if for some God-forsaken reason you don't find a job, you have to come back to India. Your loan is in dollars and your earning in India is going to be in rupees. It's a huge mismatch. You have dug yourself a huge financial grave. You will probably you'll probably recover from it only by the time you're in the mid 30s or early 40s. And by then you have lost the golden years of saving in your life. So please don't be obsessed about pursuing a degree abroad. Rather focus on pursuing good education, getting good experiences, which is very much possible in India.
Yeah, I think wonderful messages. Thank you so much for sharing. I think very insightful, very well thought out. Thanks for spending time with us today on our podcast. And to our listeners, we hope that this was helpful. This was something which showed you some new aspects of life as an NRI, financial planning, how to think about just being a good person, I guess. So thank you, Pawan. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we will be back soon with another awesome episode of Chaipekharcha. Thank you so much.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thanks, Pawan.